The Tragedy of X, Ellery Queen, Act 2, Scene 2. The Weehawken Ferry, Wednesday, September 9th, 11:40 p.m. The lights of Midtown New York. On clear nights, a pattern of bright stitches against this black sky. On Wednesday night, had almost completely blurred away in a blanket of fog, which had persisted throughout the day. And into the dark, from the ferry piers on the New Jersey shore, nothing could be seen across the river except an occasional smeared point of electric light and a gray wall of forbidding mist over the water. Ferry boats loomed suddenly out of nowhere, ablaze on lower decks. From stem to stern, ghostly small vessels felt their way up and down the river. Foghorns blared, warning on all sides to cautious river traffic, but even these sounds were smothered by the fog. In the vast barn-like structure, the waiting room behind the Weehawken ferries, a dozen men were grouped, for the most part silent and watchful. In the midst of the group stood the stocky Napoleonic figure of District Attorney Bruno, nervously consulting his watch at 10-second intervals, pacing the hollow floor like a maniac. Inspector Thumb prowled about the big room, looking sharply at the doors and the infrequent newcomers. The room was almost empty. Quite alone, apart from the group of detectives, sat Mr. Drury Lane, at whose quaint figure waiting ferry and railroad passengers sent wondering, sometimes amused glances. He sat with utter placidity, two white hands clasping their long digits about the knob of a thick, murderous-looking blackthorn stick between his knees. He wore a long black Inverness coat, cape falling free about his shoulders. On his thick hair was a straight-brimmed black felt hat. Inspector Thumb, looking his way from time to time, thought he had never seen a man so superficially oldish, from his dress and hair, and yet from his face and figure so surprisingly young. The still features, chiseled and strong, might have been those of a man of 35. His self-possession was stimulating and arresting. It was not that he ignored the curiosity of the passer-by. He was serenely unconscious of it. His bright eyes were fixed on District Attorney Bruno's lips. Bruno came over and sat down restlessly. 45 minutes late already, he complained. It looks as if we've invited you on a wild goose chase. Of course, we'll have to see it through, if it takes all night. To tell the truth, I'm beginning to feel a wee bit foolish. You should be feeling a wee bit worried, Mr. Bruno, said Lane, in his precise musical way. You would have more cause for that, you think, began Bruno with a frown, and stopped, stiffening, as did Inspector Thumb across the room, at the confused sounds of a raucous commotion emanating from the ferries outside. "What is the trouble, Mr. Bruno?" asked Lane mildly. Nose, head, and ears strained forward. "You couldn't hear that, of course, Mr. Lane. That was a cry of man overboard." Drury Lane was on his feet. In one feline moment, Inspector Thum thundered up. "Trouble on the pier," he roared. "I'm going out." Bruno had also risen, indecisively. "Thum, I'll stay here with some of the boys. Might be a decoy of some kind. Our man may come yet." Thum was already pounding toward the door. Quickly, Drury Lane followed. A half-dozen detectives ran after them. They crossed the splintered wooden flooring outside, paused to determine the direction of the cries. At the farthest end of the roofed pier, a ferryboat had come in and was grinding against the side pilings, maneuvering for the iron-shod curved landing edge. A small number of scattered figures had already leaped the intervening space as Thum, Lane, and the detectives reached the landing, while others were hurrying out of the terminal. The gold leaf on the boat's pilot house above the upper deck read Mohawk. On the north side of the lower deck, passengers milled wildly about, leaning over the rail along the bow, peering out of the windows of the starboard cabin wall into the misty blackness below. 3 ferrymen were shoving their way through the crowd, endeavoring to reach the side. Drury Lane, following in Thum's wake, suddenly looked at his gold watch. The time was 11:40. Inspector Thum sprang to the boat deck, collaring a thin, gnarled old ferryman. "Police," he roared. "What happened?" The ferryman looked scared. "Man overboard, Cap. They say he fell from the top deck just as the Mohawk was sliding into the pier." "Who was he? Anybody know?" Nah. "Come on, Mr. Lane," growled Inspector. "The ferry people will fish him out. Let's see from where he fell." They began to push through the press at the bow, going toward the door of the cabin. Thum stopped short with an exclamation, extending his arm. At the south side of the lower deck, a slight, frail figure was stepping off to the dock. "Hey there, DeWitt. Just a wet minute." The frail figure, bundled in a topcoat, looked up, hesitated, then retraced his steps. His face was white. He was panting a little. "Inspector Thum," he said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "Little assignment," drawled Thum, but his eyes were shining with excitement. "And you?" DeWitt plunged his hand into the left pocket of his coat and shivered. "I'm on my way home," he said. "What's going on here?" "Might have stayed to find out," said Thum amiably. "Come along with us. By the way, meet Mr. Drury Lane helping out." "Lane, the actor, famous man. Mr. Lane, this is Mr. DeWitt, Longstreet's partner." Drury Lane nodded pleasantly. DeWitt's eyes wandered before, fixed themselves suddenly on the actor's face, and recognition leaped into them, something of deference. "This is an honor, sir." Thum was frowning. The man at his heels waited patiently. He craned about, seeming to search for someone, swearing beneath his breath. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "Come along," he said sharply, and burrowed forward with his great bulk as the prod. The interior of the cabin was in a state of panic. Thum lunged up the brass-tipped stairs amidships, the others following. They ascended into the oval upper cabin, crossed to one of the northern doors, and emerged on the dark upper deck. The detectives, by the strong local illumination of flashlights, examined the deck, roughly between the center of the boat and the bow, a few feet behind the cleared space at the tip of the boat, and well to the rear of the pilot house above. Thum found long, scratch-like, uneven marks. The detectives riveted their lights on the spot. The scratches ran from the crisscrossed iron railing back across the deck to a cubicle or alcove at the northwest outer corner of the cabin. This cubicle's western and southern walls were outside of the cabin. The northern wall was a thin board. There was no eastern wall. The lights were trained inside. The marks on the deck emanated from the interior. There was a tool chest locked and fixed to one wall. A few life preservers, a broom, a pail, and other small articles. A chain extended across the middle of the open side. Go through it, get some keys, and open the box. Might be something there. Two detectives vanished, and Jim go downstairs and hold everybody on the boat. Thum and Lane with DeWitt trailing along walked to the rail. Beyond the rail, the floor of the deck extended 2.5 feet to the edge of the boat's side. Thum, flashlight in hand, was scrutinizing the marks on the deck. He looked up at Lane. "Something rummy here, hey, Mr. Lane." Heel scrapings, a heavy object, was dragged across the deck. A body, by God, and the heels of the shoes made the scratches. Might be murder. Drury Lane was intensely studying Thum's face in the faint light which reached them from the flash. He nodded. They leaned over the rail, straining to catch the frenzied scene below. Thum, out of the corner of his eye, watched DeWitt. The little broker was calm now, somehow resigned. A police boat had moored to the pierhead, scurrying figures of police clambered to the slippery tops of the pilings, making fast. Two powerful searchlights suddenly switched on, illuminating the ferry brilliantly, and the pier stood out in bold relief despite the fog. The upper deck, too, was now quite bright. Lights swept below the lower deck, delineating every feature of the scene. The floor of the lower deck bellied outward, ground against the loose, slimy pilings of the side piers. Nothing was visible below the wooden rampart. Ferry officials and workmen were standing and kneeling atop the pilings, shouting directions to the dim pilot house above. There was an instant clanking and groaning in the interior of the ferry. It slided out, edging away from the north pier toward the south pier. Two men in the pilot house, the captain and the pilot, were working furiously to clear away from the watery spot where the body evidently floated. "Must have been crushed to a pulp," said Thum in a matter-of-fact voice. "Fell from here just as the ferry ground against the piling. Probably was smashed right between the boat and the piling. Then, as the boat moved on, it slipped beneath the jutting floor. They're going to have a job. Hello. There's the water. By God." Oily scummed water, black and wicked-looking, appeared as the boat groaned sideways. The surface was churned and yeasty. A grappling iron appeared from nowhere out of the darkness at the top of the pilings. Police and ferrymen began to fish for the unseen body. DeWitt, standing between Thum and Lane, was absorbed in the grisly operations below. A detective appeared by Thum's side. "Well," growled Thum, "nothing in the chest, Chief, nor in the alcove at all. All right, just don't step all over these heel marks on the deck." But his eyes were abstracted. They rested with curiosity on DeWitt. The frail little man was grasping the clammy rail with his left hand. He held his right hand rigidly before him, crooked elbow resting on the rail. "What's the matter, DeWitt? Hurt your hand?" The little broker turned slowly and looked down at his right hand with an absent smile. Then he straightened and offered the hand for Thum's inspection. Lane leaned forward. On the forefinger, extended from the first joint vertically, was a fresh scar, 1.5 inches long. A thin scab had healed over the wound. "I cut my finger this evening on some apparatus in the club gymnasium before dinner. Oh, Dr. Morris at the club fixed me up, told me to be careful with it. It does pain a little." DeWitt and Thum wheeled and leaned over the railing as a long, triumphant yell reached their ears From below, Drury Lane blinked and followed suit. "We've got him. Easy there." A rope snaked down the pilings as the grappling irons caught on something solid beneath the black surface of the water. 3 minutes later, a dripping, limp bundle emerged from the river. Screams came at once from the lower deck, a meaningless murmur and confused shoutings. Shouting. "Downstairs!" cried the inspector as one of the 3 men turned and made for the door. DeWitt hurried forward across the deck. As he grasped the handle of the door, he exclaimed in pain and annoyance. "What's the matter?" asked Thum. Hurriedly, DeWitt was frowning over his right hand. Thum and Lane saw that the wound was bleeding freely. The scar hung loose, torn in several places. "Shouldn't have used my right hand on the door," groaned the little man. "Cuts opened after all, as Morris told me it would if I wasn't careful." "Well, you won't die," growled Thum, and brushed by DeWitt, beginning to descend the stairs. He looked back. DeWitt had taken a handkerchief from his breast pocket and was wrapping his right hand loosely. Drury Lane muffled to the chin in his cloak. His eyes and shadows said something pleasant, and the 2 men followed as Thum clattered on down the stairs. They made their way through the starboard lower cabin and found on the front deck outdoors that the salvagers had spread a piece of canvas. The bundle now lay on the canvas, sodden in a little pool of foul-smelling water. It was the shapeless body of a man, crushed and bloody and mangled beyond recognition. The head and face were pulp. From the peculiar position in which it lay, the spine seemed to have snapped. One arm, grotesquely, was flat, pulpy, spread out as if a steamroller had run over it. Drury Lane's face was wider than before. With an effort he kept his eyes on the gruesome remains. Even Inspector Thum, inured to scenes of bloody violence, made a little sound expressive of distaste. As for DeWitt, he gasped a little and turned his head away instantly, his face almost green. Around them were ferry officials, the ferry captain and the pilot, detectives, police, and all morosely regarding the corpse. From the south side of the boat and the cabin came sounds of excitement. The passengers had been herded into the long room under guard. The body was lying flat on its dead stomach, the lower half curved impossibly backwards, and to one side the grisly head was sideways to the deck. On the canvas lay a visored black cap soaked. Thum knelt and pushed the body with one hand. It was like a sack of wet meal, limp and unresisting. He half turned it over. A detective assisted him, and they managed to turn the body face up. It was that of a large, burly man with red hair. The features were crushed and unrecognizable. Thum muttered to himself in surprise. The dead man was dressed in a dark blue coat, pockets edged in a black leather, 2 rows of brass buttons down the entire length of the front. With suddenly predatory fingers, Thum snatched the cap from the deck. It was the conductor's cap. A shield above the visor bore the metal number 2101 and a metal inscription, 3rd Avenue Railways. "Is it possible?" exclaimed the inspector, and stopped. He glanced sharply upward at Drury Lane, who was bending over and devouring the cap with his eyes. Thum dropped the cap and thrust his hand callously now into the inner breast pocket of the dead man's coat. His hand reappeared with a shabby soaked leather wallet. He rummaged through it and leaped to his feet at once, ugly face shining. "It is," he cried. He looked around quickly. The stocky figure of District Attorney Bruno, topcoat, tails flying, was hurrying from the terminal to the ferry. Plain-clothes men pounded after him. Thum whirled on the detective. "Put double guards on that cabin full of passengers." He stretched hugely, waving the limp wallet. "Bruno, hurry up. We've got our man." The district attorney broke into a run, sprang to the boat, took in the dead man. The crowd Lane DeWitt in one sweeping glance. "Well," he panted, "what do you mean?" "The writer of the letter?" "In person," said Thum hoarsely. He prodded the body with his foot. "Only somebody else got to him first." Bruno's eyes widened as he looked down again and saw the brass buttons on the coat, the visored cap on the deck. He lifted his hat from his head despite the chill wind and dabbed the perspiration away with a silk handkerchief. "Are you sure, Thum?" For answer, Thum eased a water-softened card out of the wallet and handed it to the district attorney. Drury Lane stepped quietly behind Bruno and examined it over Bruno's shoulder. It was a round-edged identification card issued by the Third Avenue Railway Company, bearing the stamped number 2101 and a signature. The signature was a scrawl, but quite readable. It said, Charles Wood.